Hello, Matt.
Hey, Bill.
How are you doing this morning?
I'm doing swimmingly. How are you?
You have no Super Tuesday hangover? You weren't partying through the night?
I wasn't partying. I was actually doing commentary for the BBC.
Just like a liberal hippie.
Nah, yeah. Well, you know, we are sophisticated, and the folks across the pond appreciate that.
So what were you telling the foreigners about us?
Well, I mean, they are pretty, up to speed on American politics and elections. But I was just doing commentary of what happened, and it was a fairly late night, as you know. I mean, it was, when I first started talking, Mitt Romney was losing Ohio, and I mean, I actually, thought he would win. But
there seems to be a pattern in some of these close races when it's Romney versus Santorum, where Santorum wins the rural precincts early, but not overwhelmingly, and then later in the evening, Romney gets the urban areas and things turn around.
That's exactly right, and that's luckily I picked up on that, not because of my brilliance or keen understanding of the Buckeye State, so much as the fact that I follow on Twitter people who were pointing that out, and so I was able to. Twitter is very helpful, and I was able to kind of bring that up because it looked. I mean, to the untrained eye. I mean, I think Rick Santorum was up by like 15,000 votes with 75% reporting at one point, and then all of a sudden, the next thing I know, Romney picked up 10,000. The next update, Romney had picked up 10,000 votes, and so. That is obviously how it played out.
So all the media world was focused on Ohio. Romney wins Ohio, albeit not by very much. The overall picture is somewhat of a split decision. Romney wins 6, Santorum wins 3, Gingrich wins 1. So it looks like Romney is on a path. I mean, and I should say he has more than a majority of the delegates as of today, and not having crunched all the numbers and gained at every possible scenario or anything, but just being an armchair, numbnut, it would seem that he's on a path to gut. So even if you sort of follow the same trajectory where Romney doesn't run the table but he wins enough, he should have a majority of delegates by the end of the process, even if it takes a few more months. So are conservatives resigned to this at this point? Are they comfortable with it? Do they want to? Are you going to see more Romney wins as people just say, let's just get on with this and stop dragging it out? Or in all these southern states coming up where Romney is yet to win, are you still going to see Southerners, whereas a higher concentration of evangelicals, saying we're just not going to abide by this, or we're going to keep this a protracted process?
I think it's a mess. I think that all of those things are true, despite the fact that they may seem contradictory. I mean, I think that Romney is probably going to be the nominee. You will slowly begin to see people, voters and Republican leaders, grudgingly, slowly coalescing around it. He will be slouching toward the nomination, slouching toward Tampa. By the same token, he's going to, other conservatives aren't going to just give up and throw up their hands. And Santorum and Gingrich appear to, have some states that they'll win and they'll stay in the race. So it's going to be messy. And I do think that Romney will probably, as I think I've been saying all along, I still think Romney will eventually be the nominee. However, I still think he may arrive at the convention with less than the 1,144 delegates needed to be the nominee.
Well, that's the scenario. If that's the case, and he has less than a majority, but he's still very far ahead of the number 2, likely Santorum. In that situation, do you have Romney having a relatively easy time prying off a few delegates here and there and winning on a first ballot or maybe a second ballot, and it's not seen as a particularly dramatic thing, but more just a technicality? Or is him coming up a little short is that an opening for the GOP elite to say, this guy is damaged goods, he's not polling well versus Obama, he can't take a punch, we have to recruit somebody else to jump in late, and there's room to do it because he doesn't have a majority locked up?
I think all those scenarios are possible. My guess is the least of first of all, if there's in any sense a brokered or contested convention, the media will play it up to be a huge deal. Having said that, I think the less dramatic scenario is probably more likely, that there's some horse trading involved, that Romney has to negotiate to make Rand Paul or Rick Santorum his running mate.
But would he really do that? Would he really say, I'm going to make my VP someone who the nation would recoil against, most likely? Someone who would not be conducive to winning a general election. Would he be in that weak of a state that would be the price he'd have to pay to get the nomination? There'd be no way he could say, look, I'm not going to do something that's going to guarantee this ticket goes down in defeat in a landslide.
Well, again, I mean, there are other things. It could be a Ron Paul convention speech. It could be an ambassadorship. It could be the plank. There's a lot, depending on how many delegates he needs and how desperate he is, there could be a variety of options for negotiation.
A Ron Paul ambassadorship would be hilarious.
Remember, a lot. First of all, I don't know that Rand Paul would be disastrous, for example. I think that Rand Paul might be a better choice than you might initially think. I think he'd be much more accepted than his father, both within the party and within the general population. Having said that, also, people sometimes do weird things either to win the nomination or to get, to sort of gain everyone to buy in. Remember, even Reagan even seriously considered making Gerald Ford his running mate.
And so as a co-presidency.
Exactly. And that would have, I think, been disastrous, but it was seriously considered. So I think who knows what could happen. But at the end of the day, I think that Super Tuesday is probably a net plus for Mitt Romney. I think he puts some more space between he and his opponents. By the same token, it is not a glorious, wonderful evening for him. He was deprived of a big night yet again. There was no coup de grace, but you'd rather be Mitt Romney. If you had to be in someone's position, you'd rather be in Mitt Romney's position than his opponent's position.
It seems like there was a point in 2008 where Nate Silver, before he was even known to be Nate Silver, he was writing under Poblano as a Daily Kos diarist, and his first claim to fame was that he figured out that enough primaries had occurred that you could determine demographic patterns with who votes for Obama and who votes for Clinton, and then therefore you could game out the rest of the contest without worrying about running a poll. And his accuracy there was what got him his internet fame. Presumably, I think you could probably do that now, right? Isn't there enough demographic evidence? I haven't cross-checked every possible demographic sliver of data, but at minimum, there's a class gap. It seems that Romney.
Yeah, there's an age gap, there's a class gap, and there's a philosophy gap. Romney does good with people over 50. He loses people under 50. He does very well with people who have more money, and he does very well with people who are more moderate, tending to lose the more conservative. There's also a geographic issue, Bill. Two things are becoming clear. One, he's got a problem in the Deep South. That seems to be Gingrich country, if you had to pick somebody, having won Georgia and South Carolina. And then he's got a problem in the Midwest and the Rust Belt. He's won Michigan and Ohio, but barely, and he's outspent Rick Santorum, 4 or 5 to 1 at least, in doing it. So, although he has won these squeakers, especially the very 1% in Ohio, clearly there's a problem there.
So, but is this a problem regards to Romney as a person, as a candidate, that he is just weak, he is weak in these certain areas, and therefore he can't rally the party, or is this exposing a deeper fault line within the party that wealthy Republicans and working class Republicans don't see eye to eye on certain things?
I think both, but I think it's not necessarily a new phenomenon. I think that this has always, to one degree or another, been around. It's great if you have a candidate who can bridge the gap, and Romney is not that guy. But I don't think this exposes some new nascent schism. I think that it's probably normal and natural. We saw some on the Democratic side, by the way, where Hillary Clinton, tended, I'm generalizing here, but tended to do better in, Rust Belt states with blue collar, workers, sort of working class.
And these fault
folks.
lines, still get debated. There's still a question whether Obama is going to do well enough amongst white working class to win re-election. He basically won the primaries with a coalition of people of color and affluent whites and the young, and that was up to a Democratic primary process. And people said, "Wait a second, you're missing a piece here that may be critical in the general election." As it turned out, he could win a general election. He didn't. I don't think he won white working class, but he won enough. It wasn't a blowout, and so he won those Rust Belt states.
This is a Charles Murray sort of thing. This is almost the John Edwards to America sort of thing.
Well, right.
But it's interesting. But of course, Barack Obama, at the end of the day, he was able to win over those voters who were skeptical of him. So, Obama appealed to, let's say, more college-educated, elite Democratic voters, and yet he was able to win over the blue-collar Democratic, union workers. Romney, I don't know. Romney will do it to a certain degree. The question is how politically skilled is he? Can he do it? We'll see.
So outside of Super Tuesday, the main political story of the week, I think, still is the Rush Limbaugh fallout. And I think this is the first time that there's been anything remotely close to an advertiser exodus from Rush Limbaugh. I never thought there'd be something like this, but it was different with Imus, because Imus had an ideologically heterogeneous audience, and so if one camp was upset about something, a portion of his audience would be upset about something. There's a pressure point there for advertisers to be worried about, that you'd be offending someone.
And Imus also, his constituency were opinion leaders, the media elite, who would go on his show. And I don't know if his audience was huge. But his audience certainly consisted of opinion leaders, and so that was so. I think Imus was more vulnerable, more susceptible to this than Rush, who sort of lives outside the media, the need for the media's approval.
Right. He has a loyal conservative audience that likes when he's pugnacious and throws sharp elbows. And so when people on the left said boycott Rush for this and that, advertisers shrugged their shoulders because they knew what they were selling, knew who they were selling to. So what's different today?
And he's a certain degree immune from criticism because of that.
Right. So do you have a sense of what's different now? Why is after 20 years of Rush, it's only this is the first offensive thing that he said. Why is this one so much harder for Rush to deal with than all the other ones?
That's a good question. I don't know the answer. What I do know is, and this is the case with Imus as well, and certainly the case with Pat Buchanan, that these were not organic. These were orchestrated attacks. People waiting for him to say something controversial or stupid, and then pouncing on it, launching an orchestrated campaign. And so, as Nixon said, I gave them a knife and they twisted it with glee or something like that. Limbaugh certainly messed up, but clearly folks on the left were waiting for this sort of opportunity. Someone wasn't just driving along listening to Rush and heard this and were, outraged. And that was clearly not the case.
Right. There's no sense like his own listenership was mad about it.
No, I don't think so. And I mean, look, I think that Rush has said many things just like this over the years. Whether or not you think it's sort of a joke or serious and outrageous is a good question. I was watching Imus it used to be simulcast on MSNBC. I think I was watching it when he said his, comments about the female basketball team, and certainly they were, not good. But I felt like Imus had said many things just as bad and gotten a pass for it.
Right.
So it was quite kind of selective outrage. I mean, I think that part of it is if you're going to launch a campaign against Imus or Limbaugh or Pat Buchanan or whomever, you need to have sort of your Rosa Parks. And I think you want the person that he is attacking to be somebody who would be sympathetic. And if you're attacking, young college students playing basketball, female students, that's not good. And if you're attacking, is she 30? Is she 23? We're not sure. But a young woman, and calling her, a name which you should not have called her, she becomes a very attractive victim in a sense. Somebody that the public just visually, if you see a picture of Limbaugh and a picture of this young lady, most people are going to that could be my daughter, that could be my sister.
Right.
You know,
it's not going after a public figure. It's going after more like a regular citizen who is not prepared to be part of the rough and tumble of modern political discourse, and so it seems much more gratuitous.
But also, I would say somebody who's more sympathetic. I mean, if Rush Limbaugh said something equally heinous about a 6'4", white dude, let's say, it might not have the same impact or same emotional appeal as if he said something heinous about a young college co-ed.
There's a chivalry aspect to you're saying.
I think maybe a little bit. I mean, none of that justifies, calling somebody names, but I'm just saying, if you are an activist organization seeking to, launch a boycott against somebody, this bounty system, which is out there, then I think you want to wait until the person that you've targeted attacks somebody that is sympathetic.
Now, Politico has a story up suggesting that the heat on Rush indicates that Rush is not as intimidating a figure in the Republican Party and the conservative movement that he has been for so long, that now it is okay, or relatively, or more okay than before, for a Republican to say, that was inappropriate. Even if that language isn't strong enough that George Will, mock saying, eating with the wrong fork at dinner is inappropriate. This was much more outrageous. But be that as it may, you're saying more distancing between Republican politicians and Rush than you've ever seen before. Are there larger implications to that, or is this just something that will eventually blow over, even though it's taking a bit? Because at the end of the day, Rush is still going to have 10 million people who are listening to him a week, an audience that Republican politicians want to reach.
I do think that Rush has a large audience, and if you're a conservative or a Republican, it is better for Rush to like you than to not like you. It is better for him to say good things about you than to attack you. Having said that, I do agree that he is probably not as intimidating today as he was before. And I think this, again, goes into a larger motif for people who are fans of this show, something you and I have been talking about for probably at least a year now, which is the fact that we kind of live in a leaderless society, that there are no, that it is harder now to be a dominant figure because the media landscape, the political landscape has become so flat, and there are so many voices, and so I think that that Limbaugh's sort of dominance is waning, not necessarily because he's lost a step, although who can stay on top forever, but I think more to do with the fact that there are so many voices out there. And this is like the once a chink in the armor is exposed, the facade that if you say something bad or if you step out of line, you're going to be destroyed. Once that is eroded, it is gone. I do think there's something there.
I want to talk more about the whole civility debate, because I know you were in the middle of that debate with Media Matters this week. But before I get to that, I just want to ask you one other sort of question about the conservative movement's priorities here. When George Stephanopoulos asked Mitt Romney about contraception in a debate, I think it was in January, there was a lot of conservative complaining about media bias. Why is Stephanopoulos asking Romney about contraception? No one's talking about banning contraception. It seems so random and designed to trip Romney up. It's absurd. And then Obama sparks this debate about contraception insurance coverage. And it seems like conservatives can't stop talking about it, even after Obama offers the compromise. I mean, Rush was talking about Sandra Fluke for 3 days straight before the ad boycott really started to blow up. And I wondered if he made the one comment and that was the end of it, he stopped talking about it. Would this have been such a big deal? But it just seems like, and not just Rush, other conservatives, I mean Santorum too, just couldn't let this issue go even after Obama made the concession. I just find that strange, especially when there seems to be a general understanding that if you're going to beat Obama or take back the Senate, that the issue is going to be the economy. Can you explain why Russia just couldn't let this go?
Yes, I think I can. There are a few reasons for it. Number one is a sincere concern about this issue. I think sometimes there's a perception that Republicans and conservatives believe things because they think it's going to score political points. In this case, I would say that they believe things and they talk about them despite the fact that talking about them may hurt them politically. In a sense, this is noble. It may be bad politics, but so when Rick Santorum talks about this stuff, it is, whether you like him or not or agree with him or not, it is because he sincerely believes it. And so even after Obama's compromise, many conservatives still sincerely believe that this was an assault on religious liberty and on free speech, and that the compromise is bogus because money's fungible, because the taxpayers are ultimately going to pay for contraception anyway. And frankly, they were just so outraged by the audacity of the initial move that they still hadn't sort of forgiven or forgotten because it was so outrageous. But they care so much about this. But is
there a sense that after the compromise was made, despite all the arguments that you just laid out, is there any kind of awareness that it looks more like conservatives hate contraception post-compromise than pre-compromise? It's harder to make the religious liberty argument if the religious institutions aren't the ones directly providing the coverage.
Oh yeah, and I mean you'll see people like Joe Scarborough making this very point, that it was whether Obama gamed this out from the beginning or whether he made a mistake and then fortuitously corrected it, but the political debate shifted from being about religious liberty to being about contraception. Now, conservatives who care deeply about this issue would say, well, that's perception, but to me it's still about religious liberty. You might be, they would say, well, you might be right that the public perception that the politics of this have shifted, but I still care about the real issue, and I'm not going to quit fighting just because we're losing politically. Again, some of this is a sincere, they care so much about this issue, and they frankly don't care if it hurts them politically in the short term because it's such an important issue that they must fight. There's also the other thing, which is, the incentives. You have if you're a talk show host or a writer, if you're in the media, you have an incentive to ask about this because it's boring to talk about how Rick Santorum's tax plan is slightly better than Mitt Romney's, but it's more fun to talk about Rick Santorum's war on contraception, war on sex, and so the media has a vested interest to ask these questions to keep it going. People, talk show hosts and conservative pundits have a vested interest,
but
and this is where Rush got. What's that?
Blunt Ruby didn't have to go on the floor of the Senate. Republicans in Congress could have said, "Okay, we're not going to talk about this anymore. We're not going to feed this media fascination with legislation."
Well, I would say that the reason that Rush got it, it's hard to fight a two-front war, and the left and others were mad at Rush because he said something outrageous. But the reason he really got in trouble, from Republicans, is the sense that he made Sandra Fluke into a story. That this woman, Miss Fluke, would have faded off into obscurity with maybe a couple headlines the next morning after she, testified or whatever. But Limbaugh actually elevated her. It was a tactical mistake, and that
punching down.
He right, and so I think that's a fair observation that he made her a much more compelling and sympathetic figure.
Now we only got a few minutes because I have to jump at 11. But you tried to salve the wounds.
Yes. And no good deed goes unpunished, Bill.
And Media Matters took issue with what you had to say. Why don't you just recount that quickly?
Right. So I wrote a piece, sort of making a call for civility, which is. It's nothing. I mean, I've here and there done this because I believe in it. And the irony is that Media Matters attacked me for my call for civility.
I mean, and you. I mean, I think there's a place where I agree with Media Matters and a place where I agree with you. I mean, you're making a basic point that we can have political debates that don't resort to obnoxious and invective. Which I think is a non-controversial point. And I would argue, to Media Matters, if you look at the track record of Matt Lewis, this show, case in point, but also on his blog and other venues, I think you live by that. I can't think of examples where you were obnoxious to someone on the other side.
We all, we all fall short, but I try to live by this. Let me just tell this story real quick, Bill, because it's something I didn't write about because it's like Media Matters called my post self-serving to begin with. They would have called this self-serving, but my wife has a friend, and he told her he has this thing called a death box, and it's basically a footlocker where he puts letters to his kids, his sons. And should he die prematurely, his kids would have this footlocker. And my wife said to him, "Well, we don't have to worry about that for our son because our son would have all Matt's writings and his appearances." And this actually hit me very hard because number one, what we do is ephemeral. I'm one electromagnetic pulse away from my entire oeuvre being wiped out. But number two, so much of what I write, I'm not saying I'm embarrassed by it, but, whether or not Mitt Romney won Super Tuesday, is it necessarily going to change the world, and is it necessarily something that anybody would be proud of? I mean, I think I'm a pretty good political analyst, but so that hit me when she told me that story, and it made me, realize you have to sort of have a purpose, and you try to be a good person, and this was a case where I have a megaphone to a certain degree, And people may not listen to me or not, but I feel like I have an obligation to say I think that we should be honorable and have character. That's what this piece was basically about.
And I thought Media Matters was unfair in that, and they didn't cite something that you did that was hypocritical and therefore making your post self-serving. They cited the fact that they cited you were citing Peggy Noonan, and Peggy Noonan said something that conservatives shouldn't stoop to the level of the left and all their chronic meanness, and Rush said something similar in his Monday apology that his mistake was that he sunk to their level, the level of the left, and that part I think Media Matters is on much firmer ground.
All right, I get what you're saying there, but let me make this one distinction. My piece in general is about how we, and I quote Dante and I quote RFK, one of my favorite speeches, the speech that Robert F. Kennedy gave the day that Martin Luther King was assassinated, where he summons the crowd to their better angels. So you're right that the majority of my speech was sort of calling us toward our better angels. But the part where I quoted Peggy Noonan is actually not exactly about that. When she says that conservatives shouldn't, and this might have gotten her in trouble, she said ape the left, which means mimic, but maybe they took umbrage to that term, I don't know. But when she essentially says that conservatives shouldn't mimic the left, specifically what she's talking about isn't we shouldn't be negative like they are, it's that we shouldn't be obsessed with politics like they are. Now, you may disagree with that, but her argument
I don't even get what
that
means.
Well, I think what it means is
people who are involved in politics are obsessed with politics. I mean, that's what else is there?
I think if you're a liberal and you believe that government can solve problems and is generally a force for good, then you will be more invested in government than if you believe that government's one part of our life, but there are many facets to our life. It's a very small point, and it's kind of unfortunate that that became what this that was a small point that I made in a much larger piece, and not that it was a long piece, but in a that was a fraction of what my story was about. It would have been nice if they said, we agree with most of what Matt Lewis said. We echo his call for civility. We disagree with this one little thing. That would have been different.
I mean, I take your point that it's possible that Media Matters sort of misinterpreted what Peggy Noonan was trying to say there. I do think there is a theme on the right now, pushed by Rush, that it's the left that is so mean and obnoxious all the time, and woe is me that I slipped up this just one time with Sandra Fluke, and normally I do a show with lots of high-minded, rich intellectual discourse. And
that may be a meme, but if you read the piece that I wrote, I specifically say both sides do this, both sides are guilty of this, both sides need to show more character. That's right in my piece. So I clearly acknowledge that both sides do it. But here's part of what I think got me, I don't want to say in trouble, but caused the controversy, is that I realize that that both sides do this, but I feel like I can't really speak to the left. They're not going to listen to me. They're not going to say, well, Matt Lewis says we should behave. My audience would be more among conservatives. It's like if you're on a football team, a high school football team, and you notice that your team is getting out of line, your team is behaving inappropriately. If you're a leader, you don't have to be the coach, but if you're a leader on that football team, you would step up and say, hey guys, this is inappropriate. That's what leaders do. And you talk to your side. Because I don't have responsibility for the other side. I certainly hope that they are civil, but I wouldn't pretend that they should listen to me or that they would. So that's part of what my goal was, and I think that was maybe misinterpreted.
I'm going to leave it on that note because I have to run. But hopefully you and I, Matt, set an example for all others to follow.
That's what this show's about, Bill. That is what this show's about.
If only Rush listened to us more, perhaps he'd be a little more generous towards Sandra Fluke.
He should. Tune in, Rush.
Always good to talk to you, Matt.
All right, man. Thank you.
Take care.